No, not sorry. Hello, everyone. This is Arif. We will be starting shortly. We'll give a few more minutes as people are joining in. We'll wait for 2 more minutes and we'll start in 2 minutes. I need to look a little scholarly, so let me put my glasses. We'll be starting in a minute, sharp at 1:03 Newfoundland time. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of our captivating interview series, Leadership Under Fire. Today, we venture into the brave world of leadership within Grassroots organization of international higher education. It is wonderful to see many of you from around the globe joining us. Particularly proud of all the memorial crowd here. Thank you. I am Arif Abu, your host for the virtual exploration of leadership challenges and triumphs. But before we proceed with today's session, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. This acknowledgement is neither a thank you for your real estate nor a checkbox. Rather, it serves as a personal reminder for myself, my complex relationship with this land and settler colonialism. I also affirm my solidarity with the land back movement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Bithok, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on the lands where you are located and the indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. Today, we have the privilege of highlighting leaders who spearhead grassroots movements within Critical Internationalization Studies Network, CISN, the Climate Action Network for International Educators, CANIE, and the Research with International Students, RIS. These organizations demonstrate how committed individuals can drive significant change within the complex environment of educational institution. In this dynamic session, our esteemed panelists, Dr. Santiago Castiello, Dr. Jenna Mittelmeier, and CJ Tromley will share their invaluable insights and experiences. They will discuss how grassroots initiatives can navigate and influence institutional complexities, propelling meaningful transformation in education and beyond. Today's discussions promises to be both enlightening and thought-provoking. Whether you are a seasoned leader, an aspiring changemaker, or someone curious about the dynamics of grassroots leadership, you are for a treat. So grab your virtual popcorn and get ready to be inspired. Um, but before we dive in, I want to extend our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Sharon Stein for her opening remarks. Dr. Stein could not join us live as she is currently traveling, but she has sent us a recording, so which I will be playing and hoping the system will work with me. Uh,
About what that means in terms of our I'm very happy to be joining you asynchronously. I'm sorry that I couldn't be here live. I'm traveling right now, and of course, that gives rise to a lot of complex feelings about what that means in terms of our carbon footprint. And I think that's a good entry point for offering a land acknowledgement. And I want to first acknowledge the territory where I am speaking to you from, which is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, who have been occupying these lands since time immemorial. And I think, in addition to talking about the lands where we're currently speaking from, it's important to also consider all of the lands that are affected by the mechanisms through which we connect. So, for instance, the cobalt that is mined to go into our computers and into our phones, that is being mined in conflict zones under very unethical and even slave like conditions. So, all of the colonial conditions of possibility that allow us to connect and have these really important conversations have their own costs. And one of the many reasons why I wanted to create a space like the Critical Internationalization Studies Network is because I wanted to be able to talk about these things and not talk about them just as in asterisks, but actually as a fundamental, foundational set of questions about the ethics of the work that we're doing when we do international collaboration or when we do intercultural engagements. So that's kind of an entry point into my wider comments today. I want to also thank Arif Abu for inviting me to give this introduction. And again, I'm very sorry that I can't be there for the conversations and the moderation from Melissa and the speakers, Santiago, Jenna, and CJ. I will look forward to watching the discussions afterwards in the recording. So I guess I've been invited here to say a little bit about the importance of these grassroots international higher ed organizations for reimagining the field of higher ed and of the field of internationalization. And I think the basic dimension here is that these organizations offer a space through which we can question business as usual. It gives a different entry point than the established organizations that we have in the field. And it's not that I think these organizations can or should try to replace these long-standing organizations. We actually need people doing all kinds of work. So we need these grassroots organizations that are offering alternative conversations and spaces for dialogue and creation and creativity. And we need those folks who are pushing at the margins of these mainstream organizations, trying to invite them into deeper spaces of um, intellectual and relational rigor. And so I'm grateful to all of the people working across that spectrum, many of whom are the same people, right? The people who are founding these alternative organizations are also working within the mainstream, trying to push. And all of that work is necessary, and all of that work is valuable. Um, One of the things I wanted to say about grassroots organizations is that one of the benefits I see is that they are more likely to be treated as living entities that change and grow and sometimes die. They don't exist for their own sake or for the sake of their own continuity, which is often the case of big mainstream organizations, that the driving purpose is their own reproduction. I think for these organizations, we tend to be less likely, although not immune, from thinking that from forgetting where we're coming from and who we're trying to serve and what our guiding inquiry and orientation is. So I guess that would be one thing that I wanted to emphasize, is that in many ways I think the people who found and lead these organizations, these alternative grassroots organizations, are hopefully more likely to see ourselves in positions of stewardship, where we feel a sense of responsibility to the organization, but we're not trying to control the organization, and we understand that there's times when it's our turn to pass the torch, as it were. So I was very excited to be able to pass the leadership of the Critical Internationalization Studies Network on to Santiago and Giuliani. And I'm very happy with the direction that they've taken things in. And I know that when they feel it's time, they will do the same, and so on. And hopefully the idea is that when we pass these organizations on, we don't run away, but we rather, we hold space for the new leaders, support them in their work, and to the extent that we can, we pass on our learning, which is not only about the learning we got from our successes, but also from our mistakes and failures along the way, which are inevitable in any kind of work, particularly when we're trying something new. So when I think about the leadership of these organizations, one of the primary pieces I see is this idea that we do what is needed, which is not necessarily what we want to do. So for instance, I'm quite an introverted person, and the idea of networking and bringing people together makes me a little bit anxious still to this day. But I knew that the potential of an organization like the Critical Internationalization Studies Network outweighed my own discomfort with trying to play that sort of organizational role, and that I was working in service of something beyond myself, rather than it being about me and what I wanted to do and what was comfortable for myself. So I think if I think about the sort of guiding qualities of doing this kind of work, I think about 3 H's, which is honesty with ourselves about our capacity, about what's needed, about the things we don't want to reproduce, humility about our own positionalities, our own limitations, our own need to keep learning, and hyper self-reflexivity, understanding again that we're going to make mistakes along the way, but hopefully we can continue learning from those mistakes and sharing that learning with those who come after us. So I think that's all I wanted to say. Again, I wish you a great conversation, and I will look forward to catching up on it later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sharon Stein, for your really brilliant opening statement. Now I would like to introduce the moderator of today's session, Dr. Melissa Watley. Dr. Watley is an assistant professor of higher education at the College of William and Mary. Her research focuses on the intersections between international higher education and social context, particularly around issues related to access and equity for marginalized students. Her recent work has primarily centered on the US community college context. She's also the editor-in-chief of the Critical Internationalization Studies Review and my boss in that regard. So without further ado, let's dive into the world of grassroots leadership under fire and enjoy the webinar. Melissa.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm not, as your boss, I'm not sure how much power I have to tell you what to do. So I cannot be held responsible for anything that Arif says in this session. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we will get started with the conversation that you are all here to listen in on today. So just very briefly, and in no particular order, on the panel today, we have Dr. Santiago Castiello-Gutiérrez. He's an assistant professor of higher education at Seton Hall University in the Department of Education, Leadership, Management, and Policy. He's also the current co-chair of the Critical Internationalization Studies Network, an associate editor for the Critical Internationalization Studies Review. We also have with us CJ Tremblay, who is the founder and managing director of Althea Global Consulting Cooperative, which is a climate justice and sustainability training and decarbonization consultancy. CJ has specialized in internationalization for more than 10 years with a focus on strategic planning and change management, marketing and communications, and stakeholder relations at the University of Toronto, IDP, and Paragon Testing Services prior to launching Aletha in 2021 with her fellow cooperative members. She received her Global Executive MBA from Georgetown University in 2018, and in 2020 she was trained as a climate reality leader by former Vice President Al Gore, and she proudly served for 3 years as the inaugural Vice President of the Global Board for CANI. And then we have with us also Dr. Jenna Mittelmeier. who is a senior lecturer in international education at the University of Manchester in the UK. Her research focuses broadly on the internationalization of higher education and more specifically on the experiences and treatment of international students. She is co-founder and co-convenor of the Research with International Students Network and the Internationalization Practitioner Network. So we've got lots of representation from grassroots organizations here with us in our Teams meeting today. To get us started, the first question I'll ask is if you would please provide us with a brief overview of the organization you're representing today, just to make sure that everyone in our audience is familiar with the organizations that you represent. What is the mission of the organization, or what do you see as its primary goals? What makes the organization different from some of the mainstream organizations that we see in international education, and anything else that you'd like to share with us? Santiago, would you mind getting us started?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, I'm really happy and really excited to be here. It's really honored. Also, I have to acknowledge that probably I'm not the best person to represent the CISN at this point. Maybe it was Sharon or Giuliani, but I'll do my best to try to represent what are we doing at the Critical Internationalization Studies Network. And to briefly explain what the network is basically, as its name says, it's a network. It's a group of scholars. We try to bring together scholars, practitioners from around the world, who have different perspectives, but at the same time who share interests in, broadly speaking, issues around international higher education or internationalization. More specifically, around issues of that present a critical perspective on internationalization, and we kind of question together how can we reimagine these dominant patterns, relationships, resource distribution, representations that exist within internationalization and within international higher education. So it's kind of this place where these critical perspectives converge, and basically our role as a network is to just facilitate those conversations and those collaborations. It's a place where people can meet others from different parts of the world, where they can probably exchange some of the ideas that they might have. It's been also a place where particularly I would say early career scholars, grad students have found a safe space to say a lot of the things that probably we're thinking when we're doing work in international education, and that many of the more mainstream spaces might see a little bit like too far in the critique, and people might feel a little bit intimidating about that. So I think the network has been this kind of safe space to exchange some of these ideas, and it's a pretty organic organization. We don't have a formal structure. We don't have like a very clear, sense of being a formal association. Basically, we have two co-chairs, Giuliani da Silva, my colleague who's in Brazil currently, and myself, and we just try to come up with some ideas for the network. And then the most important thing, I think, is that the network has created the space for specific subgroups to somehow coexist within the network and do a lot of very interesting things, like, for example, the newsletter, which translated or transformed later into a journal. We have a race and racism subgroup within the network that is quite active, and they meet regularly, like every month or so, to have these discussions, to invite some presenters to exchange some ideas. And again, it's basically just to provide this platform, right? This webinar, for example, is something that we're kind of like co-hosting, but it's completely an initiative from Arif, who has taken the lead on inviting people to talk about different topics under this umbrella of the Leadership Under Fire webinar. So that's kind of our role that we see, just to facilitate that these conversations happen.
Thank you. CJ, would you mind going next?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me here. Today, I'm wearing my CANI hat, so the Climate Action Network for International Educators. If you haven't heard of it, it's an organization focused wholly on raising awareness of the sort of climate impact of our sector and sort of bringing people in hopes of doing it and doing not unlike what the Critical Internationalization Network is doing, but really like trying to do things differently and hopefully better. And our mission, like our hopes and dreams, are for a climate conscious sector that, and we voted on this in September 2020, for a net zero sector by 2030. As the international education space, we believe that we're incredibly well positioned to solve big problems. And so our hopes and dream is that net zero sector by 2030, and achieving that by way of, I guess, summarizing it in education, advocating, and like connecting people. So those three things: we educate, advocate, and connect folks who want to do this work. And then through our education and advocacy and connection work, we are hoping to bring more and more and more and more people in. You know, not, you know, unlike what Dr. Stein said in her introduction, like really trying to challenge the business as usual, the way that the like colonial structures of international education are, that we can push from the outside and advocate for doing things differently and better, and really like pushing climate action. And not unlike other grassroots organizations, it feels like it's always like this, but it's wholly volunteer run. And it was started by a group of individuals. I was sort of one of the founding members, and we came together in 2019. So just before the sort of world shifted. So it was a well-timed sort of initiative to sort of be there alongside people as we were changing, but that was sort of just circumstantial, and sort of there's no way to know how that conversation might have advanced. There's a lot of appetite for it now, but in the beginning, that wasn't always the case. And sort of with the dramatic change brought on by the pandemic, we were really well positioned to be able to sort of bring people in and support people through the change that we're going, and taking that opportunity to change people's minds and change hearts and minds and bring people in different, to see things differently. And so really what we're doing is like advocating for the people and the individuals within the sector, within their international offices, to advocate for sort of bigger system change. So that's kind of a little bit about us.
Thank you. Jenna?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm suffering from a bit of a cold, so if my voice gives out or I suddenly have to mute for a coughing fit, my apologies in advance. But my name is Jenna Mittelmeier, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Research with International Students Network, also called RIS, alongside my colleague Sylvie Lomer. And it's a network which is a collection of global scholars whose work includes international students as participants or co-researchers. So within our network, we purposefully use the phrase research with international students rather than research on or about international students, as kind of what our mission is that we hope to disrupt the assumption that students are only objects of research rather than being involved in the co-production of knowledge about their experiences. But our network takes a critical lens on research with international students, in recognition that within this particular area of research, there's been a lot of uncritical work in recent decades, which lays a really problematic foundation for practice. So one particular thing that we are mindful of within the network is how how much existing research on this topic comes from a deficit lens, which portrays international students implicitly, but also sometimes very explicitly, as lower quality students, or students who only encounter challenges and barriers or lack agency within their choices and experiences. So our network kind of exists to encourage more ethical research, which purposefully disrupts these narratives from a critical lens. We also push for scholars to recognize the ways that kind of both research and practice with international students is inherently political and embedded within political discourses about migrants more broadly, kind of recognizing as well how student mobility is intertwined with kind of colonial or hegemonic global histories. So the network exists as a follow-up to a book that I co-edited with Sylvie Lomer and our colleague Kaliani Ankule, which came out last year and was also called Research with International Students. And even though we edited this book, we saw it as more of a scholarly collective, which was produced with 49 global authors to kind of set forth a research agenda for more critical future research with international students. So the network was kind of a natural transition after the book was published as a way for this community that was developed through writing the book together to continue beyond this publication and also to grow as a space for researchers globally who work with international students to discuss and debate directions for a more critical field. So it's grown significantly kind of beyond the book to hundreds of members today. But in doing so, we have a few core values. The first is recognizing community and the relational aspects of knowledge production, especially as doing critical research in this area can feel really isolating. So we want a space for mentorship and ideas to be shared amongst kind of like-minded scholars wherever we happen to be. The second is that our community functions as a living resource bank for thinking about research on this topic differently. So our website has this kind of ever-growing wide range of resources for researchers, including reading lists, a bank of theoretical frameworks. We have an anti-glossary of contested terms, a blog. We've also started publishing a new set of disciplinary guides for how different research disciplines can support research with international students. I can see Santiago has very kindly gave a link to it in the chat. So we wanted this to be a space where researchers can find new ideas kind of beyond the historical trajectory of research on this topic. And then the third and final is a recognition that this field has tended to recycle a very narrow set of voices. And we envision a more ethical research field as one where more voices are valued and present. So one of our core values focuses on things like all of our resources and events being free and open access for anyone who wants to join them, meaning no barriers, kind of no barriers to entry or engagement. And we also work really hard to try and diversify the voices that are present within our research field by highlighting and showcasing new voices and ideas in all of the resources and publications that we produce. So I think at its core, we're a research-based community which seeks more than anything to produce better and more critical research on the narrow topic of research with international students.
Thank you. Good to have all three of you in the same room. So following up a bit on that question, I'm curious, how did you personally become involved in your organization? What were your motivations for doing the work that you've just described? And I'll open that up for whoever would like to answer first.
Okay, I can go first. I've shared this story before, so it's not a new one. And the personal question is always nice because CANI exists as an organization, but then sort of it's built of so many different people understanding what drove people to join, what drove people to give so much of themselves and their time to this organization. That was really nice. For me, I have a sister who is much younger than I am. And I remember a conversation one day where she had just shared with me that she was experiencing climate anxiety. She was like super anxious about the fact that like there was climate, like extreme weather after extreme weather events all over the world. She was like, this is stressing me out. And I hadn't really processed like my choices in my life to date. Like I didn't have that anxiety in the same way I did. You heard it earlier. I did an international global MBA that I finished in 2018. That was a lot of traveling. I had the privilege of working in this space where I did a lot of traveling. And I hadn't really processed like the impact of that. And so that conversation with my sister like hit me, I don't know why on that day, but hit me like a ton of bricks. And I like can't remember, I just can't unsee it. And then not long after was our national conference in Canada, the CBIE in Winnipeg in 2019. And I was asking people like, oh, what are you doing for climate? How are you addressing it? And why do we have so many people here? Why do you have so many people here? Like, how so much plastic everywhere? And where'd you come from? Like, how did you get here? And like, nobody except for one person was thinking about, talking about, or doing anything. And I don't know if it's because people didn't feel safe talking about it, but like, you just can't unsee that there were systemic failures, not anyone's individual choices, but like the system, right? Like, I'm a company and I have to be here because my competitor is here, and I am sending this many people because they're sending this many people. And so like it wasn't anyone's individual choices, but I remember just thinking like, our whole system is like leveraged and leveraging sort of the like future, and thinking, okay, so it was personal and like logical for me, both because it was personal because of my sister and I fundamentally believed that we could do better, but then it was logical that we would have to do better in a world where there's going to be increasing instability from this, and where students that we like claim to like care so much about are going to be handed a planet when they're sort of adults that is not as livable and in as good a condition as it was for us in our youth. And so there was like this injustice that just I couldn't reconcile. And so I just started looking for other like-minded people, and that was November 2019. And that was when I sort of randomly came across a canny like informal networking event. It wasn't an official network yet. It was like a one-page website, and I inserted myself in there. I emailed Ailsa Lamont, who is the founder, and I said, I see you don't have anyone in Canada. I would like to be involved. I want to help. And so I joined officially in December 2019, and we all coalesced around a summit that was happening in May 2020. And we were really worried that people wouldn't know how to use Zoom for this virtual conference in, just January 2020. We were like, we're not sure if people are going to know how to use Zoom. So it was really like personal and logical to me, that led me to sort of become a founding member, sort of hopefully establish CANI in Canada and support its growth in the Americas and globally for the past 3 years. So that's how I got into it.
Thank you. Jenna or Santiago?
I'm happy to go next. I think like CJ, my work with RIS kind of started from frustration as well, in the sense that I felt that there was a lot of lack of criticality within our research field, and this was having really dire consequences on the ways that international students were being treated and politicized within their local communities. And I think the network itself is something that evolved really organically, which was nice that kind of Sharon preempted that, because I think that's really important to the journey of the network. Where it kind of started as a blog about 5 years ago, where I started publishing resources like reading lists, primarily because I thought it would be helpful to use with my own PhD and master's supervisees to kind of try and encourage them to read more widely and develop a more critical lens away from the kind of inherent deficit models that I was seeing within the field. And I shared these online just through my Twitter account in case they might be helpful to others. And I was so surprised at how they started to garner quite a lot of attention and got a lot of views. And it made me realize how there was kind of interest in reflecting on how to develop research in a more critical direction within this kind of field or subfield. And that eventually snowballed into the idea for our book that we published last year, which was intended to be more of a formal guide for scholars who conduct research within this area. But we approached the book in kind of a different way to your traditional kind of academic book, where you kind of write your chapter and you send it in and you never really speak to anyone ever again about it again. We wanted to create it as a community initiative and kind of a shared collective vision amongst authors for how we see kind of research moving forward in the next decade within this field. And over the course of writing it and meeting and workshops online and whatnot, we ended up kind of organically creating a network of like-minded scholars that became the start of the wider network that exists today. And I think we originally envisioned the RIS website being a companion guide to the book that could just be this living resource where we could keep dumping more publications or more kind of critical research resources as it went along. But as we were working on the book with this global set of authors, I think we really identified there was a real hunger for a community of like-minded critical scholars. And we had a lot of conversations about how this was such a feminist decolonial approach to developing a book that just felt, I don't know, warm and fuzzy. One of our participants called it a hot chocolate network, in the sense of it just felt nice. And it felt nice to be surrounded by colleagues who had really similar values. So what I think started as a resource sharing space quickly turned into a community forming initiative that kind of evolved organically over time in regards to what people needed or wanted from it. And I think much of what the network does today comes from initiatives that are homegrown within the network. So, for example, RAS has just recently launched an early career researcher branch of the network. And that idea came from network members who came together and talked about how they wanted a space for early career colleagues to support one another and to network with one another. So that's now being led by Arif, who's here today, as well as Garangi Kumar and Adriana Pastina. Another thing we do is we have an online writing retreat that's led by Shannon Hutchinson, Luman Zhou, and Trong Nguyen. And that's something that, again, organically developed because people wanted that space to encourage one another with their writing. So I think that feels really important to the story, that the network is constantly developing according to what people want it to be. And we've allowed it to kind of take its time and cook slowly over the last 5 years to find its footing, rather than trying to dictate what it's supposed to be, creating something that makes sense for the people who are part of it. But I think along the way, what I wanted more than anything from it is, no matter what specific activities we were working on, is to have a space where I felt joy in the work that I was doing and joy in the time I was spending with people. So thinking about how can this network be a space where people find community and joy within an academic space where there's not a lot of community and joy. I think that was kind of the driving factor that has been behind everything we've tried to do.
Thank you. And very similar to my colleagues here, I think my involvement also started out of a little bit of experience and frustration with some of the topics that at that time the network was covering. I come from a background as a practitioner. For almost 10 years I was involved in international higher education from a practitioner perspective, and honestly I was very, very blind to a lot of the things that we could do better in practice of international higher education. And when I started my doctoral degree, I started getting exposed to other ideas and other perspectives. And I clearly remember that in one of my classes, Organization and Governance, Gary Rhodes assigned a reading by Sharon. And I felt, that, wow, like this person, like it was Sharon and Vanessa Andreotti's piece on international students. And I started thinking like, wow, like this person is into something. I want to learn more. So I started going into a rabbit hole on Sharon's work, and I completely felt identified and a little bit also transformed my own perspective. So I started getting involved and engaged with some of her work, and then eventually I met her through a few conferences, the Intercultural Competence Conference in Tucson, and then through ASH. And I just kind of like started following the network, which was started in 2018. And then at that time with Dr. Watley here and Dr. Villano, we also kind of started the newsletter for the network, trying to amplify a little bit of its impact and what was happening. And that's when Sharon invited me to, along with Giuliani, to co-design and implement the Critical Internationalization Studies Masterclass, which, by the way, it's still open. It's a great resource. We have a lot of different lectures there and a syllabus with different readings that people could, be familiar with some of these ideas and concepts, even if you're not, formally enrolled in any probably degree or program that might expose you to some of these ideas and literature. We wanted to put that out there. And after the masterclass, at some point, Sharon invited Giuliani and myself to continue with the network, and she needed to step down a little bit. And my motivation, I think, was same. Like I wanted to be part of a movement like this one that I think it's changing the conversation, and it's for the better, obviously, that it's inviting us to be more critical and to understand and analyze things differently. But at the same time, to me, it was very difficult because, as opposed to what Sharon White is describing in the video, I felt that I could contribute in this way of like being, networking, a more of kind of person and facilitating and convening. And but to this day, I still feel very kind of like uncomfortable being kind of the face in a way of an organization that it's a scholarly organization of critical scholars, when I myself still think that I'm still learning a lot of things, and putting my own scholarship in that realm, and that conversation has been a real challenge. But I thought that I could contribute with the skill set that I have, which could be more in this like administrative kind of like networking position, and that's what I've been trying to do. And along the way, I've also learned a lot about how can I approach my scholarship from a different perspective as well. And I mean, I think that's what really has motivated me to keep working within the network, and also just that the amazing people that we have. Like it never ceases to surprise me that now we have almost 800 people signed up to receive the newsletter, who are somehow engaged with the different activities, the webinars that we have, and that's really been an amazing source of collaborating and learning with and from other people in many different regions of the world.
Thank you all. As you've been sharing your own stories, I've been thinking about how I myself would answer this question. And Santiago, what you said really resonated with me. I remember when Sharon reached out to me and asked if I would co-edit the newsletter, I remember thinking like, who, me? I felt like I was still too early career to do something like that, but I said yes. So let's shift topics a little bit and talk a bit about complexities, challenges that you've encountered when leading your organization. What sorts of institutional challenges or complexities have you encountered when trying to address your organization's goals or mission? If you can give an example, that would be great. And then how have you addressed these challenges? And Santiago, oh wait, hold on. Jenna, you have not gone first yet. If you would mind starting.
Happy to oblige. Thanks, Melissa. This is probably not surprising, but I think the biggest challenges for us are time and resources. So in terms of time, I mean, running an organization of any size, it takes a lot of time, and that has to come from someone or somewhere. So for myself, what I put into this organization kind of waxes and wanes throughout the year, but on average, I'm probably dedicating kind of half a day every week just to keeping the website and the network running and kind of admin stuff. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's time that isn't workloaded into my regular job. And it's not viewed by my institution as valuable, despite I think it has a significant impact on the field. So our network website, for example, the resources on it has been accessed last year by over 12,000 unique individuals from over 100 different countries. And it's really regularly cited or shared within the field. And it's used as a teaching resource in many contexts. But it's not making my institution any money. And it isn't a formal publication. So it isn't recognized in terms of my current workload or my future promotion, or during my performance reviews. So kind of from my institution's perspective, the work that I do for this network is a voluntary use or maybe even a waste of my time. And I think that's particularly true in the UK, where I'm based, where our work is judged through a research excellence framework, and that creates a really narrow definition of what counts as impactful and high quality research work. And community development is not considered impactful and high quality research work, even though I think it's probably the most beneficial part of my work as a scholar. And then in terms of money, so one of our core values as a network is producing everything free and open access. With that in mind, materials and events are not free to run or create. There are material costs. So the website, for example, for our network, it costs several hundred UK pounds per year. And some of the resources that we've produced, we have paid research assistant roles, which have a financial cost. So these are things that I've tried to build into my random project grants here and there. And sometimes the website costs end up coming directly out of my own pocket when grant money has kind of run dry. And because we're a grassroots community organization, we're opposed to member fees, and we don't have a stable source of funding or income. We have purposefully not aligned ourselves with some of the major conference organizations or other organizations that are profit making, which means we're constantly scrambling and trying to be creative with time and energy within the network. And as the organization has grown, there's been more people who are volunteering their time and energy. The colleagues running the Early Career Researcher Network and the writing groups, the people who are writing blogs or creating publications, the people making resources for the website, that's all been doing voluntarily and for free. So I think that's a significant barrier that requires some creative thinking and thinking really carefully about the ethics of what we do and how we operate. And I often feel there's a lot more we could do. We could be putting on events and regular conferences and creating more publications, but it would mean having to charge our members, which goes against our core values and then creates barriers to participation, probably for the people who might need or want access the most. So I think it's a constant balance of providing meaningful opportunities while also making sure they are openly accessible and fairly accessed by anyone who wants to join, despite there being a material cost involved. So yeah.
Jay, Santiago?
I will second everything Jenna said, like exactly the same things we're facing. On a personal level, it's obviously my biggest challenge is that it's time, it's energy. When I started working as co-chair, both Juliana and myself were recently graduated from our doctoral degrees, and none of us had a job. We were looking for jobs at that time. Fortunately, now we both have teaching position in different universities, but that's always challenging. And as Jenna said, like most of this work is not recognized. I don't think my colleagues really understand, care a lot about like these types of organizations. If it's not the national, well-known, established organizations, then any service might not necessarily count. So that's kind of a challenge. But I will say that more from the organization perspective, what Jenna was referring to at the end, towards like the second part, in terms of if there's a lot of things that we would like to do, but those require a more formal kind of structure. They require money, because we cannot just rely on volunteers for everything, right? Because that's also kind of asking too much from people, especially, again, most of the people who are engaged in the network are early career scholars. So it's always keeping like this balance. Like if we do that, then we'll kind of shift and transform into what we're critiquing. And it creates a conflict, right? Like, do you want, like, you see the value in having a larger platform, more visibility, resources going out for grants and asking for sponsors and whatnot, and having, again, more formally based and organized network. But then what's the difference then between CISN in that shape and many other things that exist already out there, right? So that's not necessarily the point of why the network existed and why it was created. So that's, to me, it's a challenge. It's that moral inner conflict of what exactly can we do in a way that doesn't also become this thing that is, led by a specific group of people, a board that might, just like advance any well-intentioned agenda or ideas that they have, but it's not going to be probably as plural as having this more vague organization where everyone can really do pretty much whatever they want, and we can just like facilitate some of that work. But yeah, it's a challenge, and just like Jenna mentioned, like, I mean, Melissa and I have had to pay out of pocket for some things like domains and whatnot, just because it's not a formal organization. We don't have fees or dues for members or any kind of sponsorship other than a grant that Sharon got for the masterclass, right? Which we used to pay a small stipend to the people who participated in the masterclass, recording the lectures and preparing all of those materials. But yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge that we face.
Thank you, Santiago.
I mean, okay, now we're in a place where it's like time and money is like the baseline problem. And I think that we're all in agreement. Like there's that, the Venn diagram of like time's a problem, money's a problem. And I would say that like for Canny, another like fun level of problem is like resistance to wanting to like face the climate crisis. So we have all of those problems, as well as this additional layer of people feeling like Canny's existence is threatening the international sector, threatening their jobs, threatening their way of life, where you're on the road like half the year, threatening their identity. I don't, and most of us don't believe that's the case. There's a spectrum of folks who are involved, right? Everyone has their own opinion. So very much this part is mine, where I don't believe that's true at all. I think that we can do internationalization and we're not threatening international education as a sector. We're challenging it to be different and better. But that time, money, and resistance problem, creates like this unique piece when you also overlay the fact that people who care about this care about it a lot. We have very, very passionate members who feel the urgency. And I don't know, maybe Santiago and Jenna, you feel the same, but do you know when you're like trying to change something for good and you're so passionate, you feel like you should be doing it for free, or you feel like it doesn't matter how much it costs, it needs it, it's the right thing to do, we're going to do it no matter how much it costs. And that is true of our action, but I don't believe is true of like how things should operate, right? And so we have all these people who are incredibly passionate and want to do a lot. So Canny navigates, how do we create structure and governance in a global organization so that we can, because we have to actively bring people in. Sometimes people don't want to just come in and they're like, oh, we have this resource library, but people don't just want to go to it. We have to let people know it's there. We have to tell them why it's useful to them and that we're not threatening them, right? So we've created all these mechanisms, where we've got structure is a thing that we have to sort of deal with. And then things we want to do, and balancing those two things, right? We've got chapters and a global board to sort of keep an eye on everything, make sure no one's reinventing the wheel, or that we can make sure we're maximizing efficiency. But then also we have these big global problems as an organization, which is like money and bringing in new volunteers, because people can be so passionate, you can like get burnout, right? So we're navigating those things. We've been navigating them since 2019. And in terms of solution, they really are, like Dr. Stein said, like living organizations. And I think hearing her introduction, I think Canny feels very much like that. And we have only continued to exist because of a handful of leaders who have given their time in the sector, but also people who have like generously donated. So we've had individual donors fund the organization. We have had leader organizations like the University of Auckland in New Zealand and some other organizations sort of step up and fund Canny because of the work that is doing is really important. And there are, of course, organizations that align with those values that Canny is trying to achieve. So finding some of those unique organizations to be able to sort of make that fit in order to receive some funds to keep us going. And so that is forever a problem. And while, I think, what the like big question of this this meeting today is like, can grassroots movements drive meaningful change? And I would say like, sometimes I think they might be, this is my personal sort of perspective, but I think that they might be the only ones who can, because we have like these rigid colonial structures. And then we have people from the outside saying like, man, this isn't working for everyone. The world is changing. Institutions aren't as fast respond. And I think that like the traditional structure of not doing enough creates a gap, and that's where sort of we come in. And the organization that I work for now, Alethea, which is the sustainability consultancy, is directly, we exist because CANI existed, right? CANI as a grassroots organization couldn't do everything. It couldn't be everything to every institution who needed help, every service provider who wanted a climate action plan. It couldn't do that work of supporting the one-on-one. It had to do the big picture education, advocacy, and bringing people together, that network piece. So there are then organizations who have popped up like Alethea who exists because as a result of the work that CANI has done at the grassroots level across multiple continents, there is now a greater awareness that this has to be part of our work. So CANI, by virtue of, despite all the problems of not having enough money, but being lucky enough to have made connections with shared valued external organizations so that we can keep everything free, like Jenna's talking about, like Santiago's talking about, like it's free, we want it to be free. But we had to find ways to make it so that we keep the lights on. And some days the lights are like, are they going to turn off? Are they not going to turn off? But we've been really lucky to have like the work of our volunteers, our new board, I'm not at the board level anymore. Like I'm just a regular CANI member now. And so being able to sort of see the growth and sort of see the like impact when you're in it, sometimes you're like, oh, maybe I'm not solving these problems, but sort of stepping back, being able to see that like we're able to address those sort of challenges to still be here today. And just like Jenna and Santiago are saying, like all these networks that we've created, like we're still here. So we're doing we might not be doing all the things we want to do, but like the volunteers and this you know, funders who have come up, the grants like that have kept us going, like sometimes I don't know how we've done it. And sometimes, but we're still here. And like, I think that's a really sort of big piece of it and speaks to like the passion behind all the work that we're doing. Like it's really driven and you overcome all those barriers by like the passion.
Thank you. We've got a question in the chat, so I'm going to pivot to what Casey Dinger has posted. Reminder to our audience, if you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. I want to make sure we have time for our panelists to engage with any questions you have. So I'll read this question and then ask for your reactions. Casey is wondering how sustainable such organizations rooted in more equitable values are long-term, given that what's often driving the work is passionate individuals who are, as Jenna, you noted, doing a lot of work volunteer, or if not, often still have limited resources. The idea would be to incorporate more passionate individuals, but if they scale, I can imagine potential rifts and directions as well because of those issues. Reactions?
Good point.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's a really essential question. I mean, and I mean, I tried to allude in my response in the chat. I think part of something I'm keeping in mind is I don't yet know if this is an organization that needs longevity, because I think we were created at least in the sense of wanting to disrupt the status quo of existing research. And at some point, I hope we will become the status quo of research, and that a critical disposition is just the way research in this area is done. And at that point, will there need to be a new organization that critiques, you know, when you're pushing against a hegemonic structure and then become a hegemonic structure, what happens then? I don't know. And I think we haven't thought that far ahead, would be my response.
So I would, yeah, echo what Jenna said, and especially around the fact of like, ideally, we would like to work ourselves into obsolescence, right? Like it would be so nice to not have Alethea or CANI be necessary because our whole sector has responded, is meeting like the science-based targets of needed by climate change. But I sort of take Casey's point incredibly well. I hadn't seen it in the chat when I was talking about it, but like it's driven by passion, and that's why we're able to do what we're able to do. But those points along the way where we had, you know, a sponsor for the podcast and a sponsor for Climate Action Week. I would say that those are really important things to do, because we would say we would make the connection between work and some sort of stipend and compensation. We're not always able to do that. And then we don't do the work. Like, we haven't published a lot of podcasts recently because we don't have the resources to do that, and we don't necessarily want people to do. And I especially, Alethea is incorporated as a worker cooperative, so we very much value people's work and labor. And so I don't know how, and we can overcome it. I sort of experienced a mini burnout, and that's not what we want, right? So we want overcoming that, and sort of the justice element, right? Like, who are the types of people who will do volunteers? Sometimes they're looking to move up or change, and then is that like exploitative? And how do we sort of anchor our truth in sort of moving away from like traditional unpaid internships and things like that? Like, those are things that aren't most representative of our values. So I think for us at CANI is aligning with like the like-minded partners, like values-based partners. At Alethea, because we exist as a result of CANI, anything that's like training practitioners, any of our programs, we just give 10% to CANI. If CANI wasn't here, Alethea wouldn't be here. So in terms of like the education piece, and we give directly back to CANI so CANI can keep the lights on. There are other organizations that I hope will do the same. And there are some other organizations that contribute to CANI because we sort of share those values. And I don't know what that looks like for CISN, or sort of like what you're talking about, Jenna. Like, it's just mean, we've kind of shied away from the system. And so for us, because we weren't talking at like a system, like we're advocating for change at a system level, but we had individual partners who shared our values in the system. And so being able to like connect with them and have them support our organization is what made it so that we have been able to at any point in time pay people for their work, but recognizing very explicitly that like so many people volunteer their time. So it's the forever challenge. And like, why should everybody should be paid to do this important work? I'm with you. So, but I don't know how we do it all the time.
Yeah, and very briefly, I'll add. Obviously, I agree with what has been said, but then sometimes I also question myself if it's also a matter of how we've been, all the time accustomed to like this growth mentality that, oh, we're doing something that is good, it's great, we need to expand this, we need to grow this because it's good, and we want to make sure that this gets everyone. And that kind of mentality has also gotten us into some trouble in higher education. Like, universities are very well intentioned, right? And there's like, oh, we are these public good institutions that we want to provide access and education to everyone, and it has gotten us to a place where universities are looking for more and more and more and more resources so that we can be better and better and better and bigger and bigger and bigger, because that's kind of like we should be doing. And I'm not so sure if that's the case always, right? So that's what I was referring to when I was questioning that. Sometimes like our instinct is to kind of like emulate what maybe other organizations have done to be successful, but then at the same time it might transform us into something that we are actually critiquing at the moment, right? Which is kind of like this. We've written about that in the network. This neoliberal, neocolonial kind of academia that we have by imitating some of the same practices. So I don't know. To me, it's really like an inner conflict. How to find that balance where you want to do more things, better things, and make sure that other people can learn and see what the members of the network are doing, but at the same time being mindful that it's not just like growth per growth's sake, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, great, thank you. I'll shift back to the questions that we prepared in advance, but please feel free to put additional questions in the chat. And I'm seeing that Santiago also noted that you can raise your hand. We'll unmute you and you can ask that way. So the past few years have been especially difficult for internationally focused organizations, given a variety of global challenges that have come up. I'm curious how your organization has addressed these challenges or not, and then what have you learned from them? And if you can speak to a specific challenge, that would be helpful. And I'll open it for whoever wants to go first this time.
I can start. And I was reflecting on this and remembered some of the conversations that we've had, Arif, Melissa, Chris Fuglestad, and myself, with the newsletter, which is, there's a lot of things happening in the world. And again, our first instinct is we need to speak up, right? We're a network, we're a critical internationalization studies network. We need to, have a critical stance and be very, outspoken and upfront about some of the things that are happening in the world. But then at the same time, it's like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean for an organization like the ones that are represented here to actually, have a common voice? Like, we cannot speak on behalf of everyone that feels affiliated with the network and have a stance in every single thing that's happening in the world. I was reading Sarah Ahmed's work earlier this week, and where she analyzes, these kind of messages that universities have, and how they it's even a conversation that resembles as if the institution, the organization itself, has a face, has a body, and opinions, values, as a single entity, which is not necessarily the case. So I think some of those challenges have been like, amidst all of the craziness that has been happening in the world for the past years, like, what exactly is our role, our contribution, and how can we, be in a way like part of those conversations and discussions without necessarily, like making probably like, I don't know, like a statement or a stance in different things that are happening in the world. So that's been for us, I think, a challenge that we are not necessarily good at navigating. And I have to say that for the most part, probably you've seen, our response has been like to do not a lot of things, and other than provide space, right, through the newsletter for people to express some of their opinions, their ideas, up front or anonymously. We have the journal as well, but we've been more inclined to do that than to like actually issue some sort of statement as a network, because at the end of the day, who is the network? As we were saying, it shouldn't be like this very formal, rigid structure where Julian and myself are speaking on behalf of 800 people that somehow affiliate themselves with the network, right? Or the editorial board of the newsletter and journal. So that's been one of the challenges.
Yeah, I think I was going to say something kind of along that line as well, in terms of thinking about what you're for. So I think this kind of makes me think of two things. The first is that our network focusing on research with international students, we're really mindful that international students' presence in many common host countries are being increasingly politicized, particularly by far-right movements and anti-migrant sentiments. And one of the driving forces of our work is seeing the link between the discourses we use in research with international students and how that filters into practice in terms of the ways international students are treated or talked about within their communities. And I think that kind of growing political context has influence the direction that we see the network going. So for example, we have a sister organization, which is an internationalization practitioner network, which tries to communicate some of these critical issues specifically for a practice-based audience, and for practitioners who maybe aren't well versed in critical literature on this topic. But that's a major kind of challenge and balance, particularly considering how the languages that are spoken between critical research and critical practice don't always align with one another, or we may not be speaking from the same perspective. So it draws these questions, like Santiago was kind of pointing to, about what are we for, and who is our intended audience? Are we focusing on research practitioners? Are we looking at teaching practitioners? And that political context, I think, shapes that direction. And as an organization, we've been kind of evolving organically and constantly. And so there's a need to constantly pause and think about purpose as the community changes and grows, and as the political context in which we work also changes. The second thing that I'm really mindful of, kind of building on that, is how I as a person, how much am I as a person driving the ship of this organization, and to what extent is that a weakness? The organization has grown a lot over the last few years, so it's no longer this blog that I occasionally word vomit into, and I can feel that it has a stronger influence over time in the direction of knowledge production. And for that to be ethical, I have to make sure that it's not just me, and that it isn't limited by the limitations of my own positionality and privileges. So what I really don't want from the network is it to be one that has developed out of critique of existing structures, to then become its own hegemonic and excluding force becomes quite a fear, I think. And so I think there's been a point in which I've had to realize that it needs to become its own thing, kind of like a child leaving the home, especially kind of since our book was published. It's this recognition that yes, I put a lot of time into the community, but it doesn't belong to me. It's ours or it's nothing. And so that means kind of getting comfortable with letting go of what was initially kind of my little baby, and bringing kind of new voices and new people in, recognizing that there's a need for it to exist as a structure and not as a person. And I think a lot of academic organizations and conferences are thinking about how can we spotlight the so-called big names and draw a crowd in based on these big named people and their reputation in the field, when actually what we are trying to do is dismantle that and think instead, how can we bring in new names and put a spotlight on the great work that people are doing, which has perhaps been undervalued. But that's a constant effort to be thinking outside of your network in a really consistent way, and one that I think we constantly have to be thinking about how to do better.
Yeah, so I think it's so interesting in terms of like how everything that is happening with the world and the political landscape. One of the things that is a constant at Canny is like the climate crisis is not changing. Well, I mean, it's changing, but it's not getting better. So we're constantly in this reality of navigating immediate priorities of everybody, not just volunteers, but other partners, other country regions, because it's a global network. So we have everyone's perspective, but then also this foundational truth that the climate crisis isn't changing and is steady. And how do we continue to prioritize it when it feels maybe nebulous or not like an immediate risk? And so our challenge, the volatility in the last few years has also been a good, I know it sounds terrible, but like a good opportunity, because things are changing so much that with change comes the need to adapt and maybe learn something new to adapt. And there's, with everything that people are navigating, there's always an opportunity to say, hey, thinking about doing things differently. When you're going to make your new strategy, when you're going to make your new commitments, consider climate action as just one part or sort of lens through which to do your work. And that can look like a lot of different things to a lot of different conference providers or institutions or service providers. The Canny Accord is a great tool to signal your commitment, but different organizations have different priorities. So institutions are a little bit slower to sign on than maybe associations or service providers. And sort of our challenge remains, in addition to the resources, how do we like make sure that we can take that resistance because of whatever, whether it's the identity piece we talked about or the resistance for people feeling threatened, or whether it's the resistance because there's always another priority because the climate crisis feels nebulous and not like a priority right now. How do we sort of take an opportunity that is provided by change to support people, right? We're not calling people out, we're calling people in, we're here. Kenny exists entirely to support the sector. It is good for our sector to respond to the climate crisis, regardless of everything else that's happening. And sometimes because of everything else that is happening, it's a really important lens. So learning over time as the world is volatile and everything changed, that change will always provide an opportunity for Canny to support any organization, sector, country, to institutions or people in that country to sort of apply this lens when sort of resetting or doing something, like having to react or respond to something. That is always a good lens to apply to help solving your problem.
Great, thanks to all three of you for those answers. I'll put out one final call for questions from the audience. We have time for one, maybe two questions if they're short. Again, feel free to also raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I'm not seeing any new questions in the chat or anyone typing, no hand raising. I'll just ask then for each of our panelists, if you have any concluding thoughts you'd like to share, anything that we didn't discuss in our conversation that you were hoping you'd be able to bring up, or anything that occurred to you while we were talking. This is a bit of a wild card question. You didn't know I was going to ask this one.
I can say very briefly that, I mean, despite the fact that we have discussed, a lot of challenges and things with these types of organizations, hopefully this is not discouraging anyone, because the opposite, I think if there's anything within the area that you are working or studying that somehow doesn't feel right and bothers you, and you feel that there's something that should be done differently, I think the best route to change things is by studying these types of grassroots movements, and by getting together with people that might have this same type of interest that you might have, and just creating these spaces to think, to bounce off some ideas, to start with tiny steps, small initiatives that will have an impact. And even though we might struggle with a lot of the things inherent to being a kind of like a small informal type of organization, each of the three examples that were presented here have created an enormous impact, different levels in different capacities. And so I guess it's an invitation for anyone to obviously participate and join one or two or three of these organizations, but also to start whatever you feel that you need to be part of and change in whichever realm you're working on.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
No, I was just going to say that I think maybe I put across about, how much work it is and how much effort it is, but it's also so much joy. And I do want that to be a final message, maybe, that despite all the additional work, it is something that is so meaningful to the work that I do, and I can't imagine my career without it. And I think so much of what I do is from people who I have met within this network, who I've gone on to work with. And so I think, when I was doing my PhD, I was so lonely in my department. And even, post PhD, I was just feeling like I was going through the motions, and that I wanted more people who I felt like I had a genuine connection with and who cared about the things that I cared about. And so doing this kind of work and being involved with these communities, I mean, it has made my work worthwhile. And academia is a place where there is so much stuff that is not worthwhile. And it can be such a soul-sucking place, that to find a space where you feel seen and where you find joy and where you feel like people are genuinely trying to raise you up rather than tear you down. then that's a space where you want to invest your time. So I would never, I wouldn't take any of it back, and I would put twice the effort in if my institution allowed for it. But I think, yeah, just like Santiago was saying, it's this kind of call that if you have that feeling of not, of seeing a problem that you want to fix, or, not feeling like the community you want is existing in the space that you're in, that I think these grassroots spaces are where people have passion and care and find some semblance of joy within their work. And it's been a great joy to be part of it.
Yeah. And, I think can be like so funny thinking back about earlier in our conversation when Jenna and Santiago were talking about like feeling a little bit of frustration around what I think taking action is so soothing. I mean, getting to joy is the goal, but I find that like just doing something was incredibly soothing, and allowed me then to like open up to certain possibilities, to seek out different people who felt the same, like very different people can feel the same. So I think that it was really an opportunity to, start to push through that discomfort, start to heal, because I think that people in the sector genuinely are good and want the best. And so finding people who are good and want the best for the sector and share sort of your vision for how to get there or how to do better is incredibly moving. And by joining, starting, engaging with these organizations, you just never know what's going to happen. And that's so exciting. There's the 0% chance if I had thought about where I am today, having my own organization to do this work. I never would have thought that. I never wanted to start my own business, really. But to have it come so organically and have people who have joined the co-op because I met them through these organizations, like that is so powerful, like as an individual, as part of the system, and like to foundationally have like healed from the frustration of the disconnect, because we're able to take action and collaborate and find sort of those people that I never would have before, and that I to do work that I never imagined myself doing. It just sort of opened up a whole new world. And I think that opening yourself up to that, it is a lot of work, but it's certainly not, like Jenna said, I'd do it a million times, 10 out of 10, I would do it again. And even though like it was a lot of work to pretend that it is not true, but it was really like what I got out of it was so much more than I put in. And so I would say get involved in whatever it is that you're feeling that friction with, because you're probably not alone in that feeling.
Thank you all for those answers and for helping us end on a positive note. Agreed with all of you that, it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, but if I wouldn't do it if I didn't leave our editorial meetings excited about what comes next and wanting to keep pushing forward with our work. So thank you all for that. We will close here for today, but before everyone logs off, I want to remind you that we've got our 4th episode of Leadership Under Fire happening on July 31st. And in this episode, we're bringing together leaders of NAFSA, the International Education Association of South Africa, and the Brazilian Association for International Education. We'll be asking them critical leadership questions. The session will be moderated by Dr. Sonia Knutson. So stay tuned for more information about that. And we hope that we will see you all there. Thanks everyone for being here with us today. And thank you to our wonderful panelists for giving us their time today to answer all of our questions.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Arif, for making this happen. Thanks, everyone. I'll share the recording as soon as I have it, and I'll upload it to YouTube as well.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
This was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Get better, Jenna.
Yeah.
Bye.